25,000 feet above Nazi-occupied Europe. A single mistake meant death. Not capture, not surrender, instant death. American B-17 bombers ruled the skies, massive, flying fortresses bristling with guns. German fighters attacked them every day. But this time, something unbelievable happened. A German fighter didn't just collide with a B-17, it became part of it. And what followed shocked both sides of the war. This is the true style, WWII story of a German fighter that flew into a B-17 bomber and a crew that landed with the enemy still inside their aircraft. It was early 1944. The air war over Europe had reached a brutal peak. Every morning, hundreds of American B-17 flying fortresses lifted off from English airfields, their engines shaking the earth. Their mission was simple in words, but deadly in reality. Fly deep into enemy territory, bomb German factories, survive if you can. The B-17 was slow, heavy, and predictable. But it was tough. Each bomber carried 10 men. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, engineer, radio operator, and gunners watching every angle of the sky. They knew the odds. Statistically, a crew needed to complete 25 missions to go home. Most never made it past 10. On this particular morning, one B-17, its aluminum skin, already scarred from previous missions, joined a massive formation heading toward Germany. The crew joked quietly, checked weapons, adjusted oxygen masks. None of them knew they were about to experience something that had never been trained for and never imagined. On the other side of the sky, a German fighter pilot scrambled. Germany was desperate. Fuel was running low. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. New pilots had weeks of training, not years. The Luftwaffe was bleeding, yet orders were orders. Intercept the bombers. Break the formation. Bring them down, at any cost. The German fighter climbed rapidly, engines screaming. He saw them soon enough. Dozens of silver aircraft flying like a mechanical wall. B-17s. He lined up his attack run, knowing full well what waited for him. 50 caliber machine guns. Crossfire. Death. But he dove anyway. The first passes were chaos. Tracers ripped through the air like glowing knives. Explosions shook the bomber formation. One B-17 took a direct hit. Another lost an engine. Inside our featured bomber, alarms screamed. The pilot fought the controls as the aircraft shuddered. The engineer shouted damage reports. The gunners fired until barrels glowed red. Then everything went wrong. A German fighter came in too fast. Too close. Too determined. The pilot of the B-17 barely had time to react. There was no explosion. No clean impact. Instead, metal screamed against metal. The German fighter slammed into the B-17's rear section. Its wing sheared. The propeller shattered. The cockpit tore open, but instead of falling away, the fighter jammed itself inside the bomber. Its broken fuselage wedged into the B-17's tail like a spear. The B-17 lurched violently. Men were thrown against bulkheads. Guns snapped from mounts. The tail gunner screamed and then went silent. For a moment, everyone thought they were dead. But the bomber didn't break apart. It kept flying. Smoke filled the aircraft. The pilot fought to stabilize the plane. Controls felt wrong. Heavy. Unbalanced. The engineer crawled back through the fuselage to inspect the damage. Then he saw it. A German fighter, embedded inside the bomber. The enemy pilot was still there. Dead or unconscious, no one knew. The tail section was destroyed. The tail gunner was gone. The bomber was bleeding air, fuel, and oil. The question was simple. Jump or try to land. Bailing out over Germany meant capture, or lynching by civilians. Staying inside a crippled bomber meant gambling with gravity. The pilot made his choice. We're going back. The crew knew what that meant. Flying hundreds of miles. With half a tail, an enemy aircraft stuck inside them, and German fighters still hunting. The formation moved on. The damaged B-17 fell behind him alone. That was usually a death sentence. Miraculously, no fighters attacked. Perhaps the sight confused them. Perhaps they thought it was already doomed. Inside, the crew worked silently. They dumped weight, shut down damaged systems, prayed the airframe would hold. The German fighter shifted with turbulence, grinding against the bomber's structure. Every vibration felt like the last. Hours later, the pilot saw water, the English Channel. Men cried, not from joy, from exhaustion. If they ditched, rescue was possible. If they landed, it would be historic. The pilot lowered the landing gear. Nothing happened. Hydraulics were damaged. They tried again. One wheel locked. The other didn't. They had one chance. The bomber approached the runway. Ground crews stared in disbelief. A B-17 was coming in, with a German fighter visibly lodged in its tail. The pilot cut engines at the last second. The plane slammed down. Sparks flew. Metal screamed. Then, silence. The aircraft stopped. The crew lived. Medics rushed in. Only then did they confirm the German pilot was dead. Killed instantly in the collision, the B-17 was photographed immediately. Intelligence officers couldn't believe it. An enemy fighter had rammed a flying fortress and lost. The aircraft was declared beyond repair, but the story spread across airfields, across units, across history. As the engines finally died and silence swallowed the runway, the crew didn't move at first. They just sat there breathing hard, hands shaking, ears ringing. Then reality returned. The hatch opened. Cold English air rushed in. Ground crews froze in shock. They had seen damaged bombers before. They had seen aircraft land on fire. But they had never seen this. A German fighter aircraft and twisted, broken, unmistakably enemy was still lodged inside the tail of an American B-17. One mechanic whispered, "How is this thing still together?" The tail section was nearly gone. Control cables were torn, metal frames bent like paper, and yet the bomber had flown. When intelligence officers climbed inside the aircraft, the destruction became clearer. The tail gunner's position was completely crushed. There was no chance of survival. The German fighter's engine had punched through the fuselage, stopping just inches from where another crewman had been standing minutes earlier. One officer later wrote that luck alone had saved the crew. The German pilot was still strapped into his seat. Young. Barely more than a boy. His aircraft had run out of ammunition. Fuel nearly gone. This was no accident. This was desperation. Later analysis told the story. The German fighter had taken heavy damage during earlier passes. His guns were jammed. His engine was failing. Bailing out over Germany meant capture, or death at the hands of civilians. Returning to base was impossible. So the pilot made a final decision. If he couldn't shoot down the bomber, he would become the weapon. Ramming attacks were rare, unofficial, and terrifying. Pilots were never ordered to do it, but some did. This young German pilot chose to die fighting. The story spread through the airfield like wildfire. Crews stopped what they were doing to see it. Pilots stared in silence. Veterans shook their heads. Some felt respect. Others felt horror. Many felt both. An American gunner later said, "That pilot wanted us dead so badly, he gave his own life trying." The aircraft was photographed from every angle. Those images would later appear in briefings, magazines, and history books. It became proof of how savage the air war had become. The surviving crew were grounded for weeks. Some never flew again. One refused to step inside another bomber. Another volunteered to return immediately, saying the dead crewman deserved it. War does that. It breaks some men, hardens others. The pilot was awarded a medal for extraordinary airmanship. Landing that aircraft should not have been possible. But skill, calm, and sheer willpower had brought them home. This incident wasn't just shocking because it was rare. It mattered because it showed how close the war had come to madness. Pilots on both sides were young, terrified, under impossible pressure. They were told to stop the enemy at any cost. Sometimes, that cost was everything. Today, aviation historians still study this landing, not for tactics, not for strategy, but for limits. The physical limit of aircraft design, the mental limit of human endurance, and the moral limit of warfare. A bomber carrying an enemy fighter inside it is not victory, it is survival. A few days after the landing, the surviving crew gathered quietly near the wrecked bomber. The aircraft had been moved aside, its skin peeled open like a wound. No cameras, no speeches, just silence. They stood where the tail gunner had once sat, now nothing more than twisted metal. The chaplain spoke softly, not about victory, not about hatred, only about men who never made it home. One American crewman later said the strangest part was this. They also felt silence for the German pilot. He had tried to kill them, yes, but he had also been young, alone, out of options. In that moment, the war felt less like flags and more like graves. Official reports were written quickly. Diagrams, measurements, impact angles. The conclusion stunned engineers. The German fighter had entered the bomber at a precise angle that did not snap the main spar. Had it been inches higher or lower, the B-17 would have disintegrated instantly. This landing was not supposed to exist. The report ended with a single sentence that quietly circulated through bomber command. Aircraft survival attributed to extreme structural tolerance and exceptional pilot control. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. It was a miracle. By summer, the story had reached other air bases. New crews heard it during training. Veterans told it in mess halls late at night. Some laughed nervously. Some didn't laugh at all. The message was clear. If this could happen, anything could. It reminded crews that the enemy was desperate, and that survival was never guaranteed, no matter how strong your aircraft was. Across the lines, the Luftwaffe also whispered about the incident. Pilots spoke of a comrade who never returned, a pilot who faced bombers with empty guns. Some called him reckless. Others called him brave. But all understood his fear. By 1944, Germany's skies were no longer theirs. Every mission felt like a last mission. For some pilots, crashing into the enemy felt like the only way left to fight. Photographs of the B-17 circulated quietly after the war. Historians stared at them for years. A bomber built to destroy cities, carrying the wreckage of a fighter built to stop it. Locked together, frozen in time. It became a symbol not of triumph, but of collision. Two nations, two young men, one moment neither could escape. Years later, reunions were held. The surviving crew aged. Hair turned gray. Voices softened. But when asked about that mission, they always paused. One said, "I stopped hating the enemy that day." Another said, "I realized survival doesn't mean you win. It just means you live." They never forgot the sound of metal tearing, or the weight of something foreign inside their aircraft. World War II is filled with massive battles and famous names. But history is remembered through moments like this. Moments where machines fail, plans collapse, and human choices decide everything. A German fighter flying into a B-17 and landing with it still inside is not just a strange headline. It is proof that war pushes humans beyond reason. Months later, engineers were still talking about that B-17. They measured stress fractures. They examined rivets pulled halfway out of the skin. They studied how the tail section had remained barely functional. The conclusion was unsettling. The bomber had not survived because it was undamaged. It survived because it was overbuilt for a war.